The modern autopsy of Queen Charlotte, the hidden ailments of a Georgian queen. Forget Bridgerton's powdered perfection. The real Queen Charlotte wasn't just all wigs and waltzes. She was a woman whose health collapsed under the weight of royal duty, 17 pregnancies, and the chaos of a crumbling monarchy. So, what would a modern autopsy of Queen Charlotte reveal? Setting the scene, the queen who outlived her own era. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, born in 1744, married at 17 to George III, and spent nearly 6 decades trapped in a gilded cage of duty, disease, and domestic disaster. She was the longest-serving British Queen Consort at the time, the grandmother of Queen Victoria, and the woman who watched her husband, the King of Great Britain, slowly lose his mind. But long before her own death in 1818, Charlotte's body was keeping its own royal secrets. If we placed her on a 21st century autopsy table, what would her body tell us about the toll of empire, childbirth and grief? The case file. Name, Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Age at death, 74. Occupation, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, mother of 15. Well, technically 17 pregnancies, 15 live births. Date of death, 17th November 1818. Location, Kew Palace, Surrey. Primary reported cause, dropsy, what we'd now call congestive heart failure with fluid retention. The symptoms. By the last decade of her life, Queen Charlotte was visibly unwell. Her ladies-in-waiting wrote that her legs were swollen to the size of barrels. Her breathing was laboured, her energy non-existent. She also suffered from arthritis so severe she could barely stand. Doctors of the day diagnosed dropsy, a vague Georgian term meaning fluid where it shouldn't be. To us, that screams chronic heart failure, likely triggered by hypertension or kidney disease. Modern autopsy begins. If this were a modern coroner's case, we'd start with the heart. It would almost certainly show hypertrophy, thickened muscular walls from decades of strain. Her arteries, probably laced with atherosclerosis, calcium buildup that narrowed her blood vessels, restricting oxygen and overworking her heart. Fluid would be found in the lungs and abdominal cavity, the telltale signs of end-stage heart failure. In other words, her heart simply couldn't keep up anymore. Complicating factors. The queen who bred an empire. Now, let's talk about those 17 pregnancies. Each one was a risk. Childbirth in the 18th century was brutal. No sterilisation, no antibiotics, no pain relief, and no concept of postpartum care. Repeated pregnancies would have caused pelvic prolapse, organs sagging from weakened support muscles, iron deficiency anemia, and chronic postpartum infections, probably leaving long-term inflammation in her body. In modern terms, her heart didn't just fail, it was exhausted. Psychological stress and grief. Her husband's mental collapse was catastrophic. For more than 2 decades, Queen Charlotte acted as both monarch and caretaker. She endured violent episodes, isolation, and public scrutiny. Modern medicine tells us chronic stress releases cortisol, which raises blood pressure, damages the heart, and weakens immunity. So yes, even her grief was killing her. Imagine living each day wondering whether your husband might attack you, and being expected to smile at the orchestra that night. The treatments that made it worse. 18th century medicine was a circus. When Queen Charlotte's dropsy flared, doctors reached for the usual horrors. Bleeding, to release bad humours. Blistering, using hot plasters to draw out fluid. And everyone's favourite, calomel, a mercury-based purgative guaranteed to poison you slowly. In other words, the cure was as deadly as the disease. A modern toxicology screen would almost certainly find mercury residue in her liver, kidneys and hair. Chronic mercury exposure from years of treatment. What we'd find in the modern morgue: external examination, a frail woman, mid-70s, advanced edema, swelling, arthritic deformities in hands and knees, skin mottled, likely from poor circulation and heart failure. Internal examination: heart, enlarged, thickened, left ventricular hypertrophy. Lungs, congested, fluid-filled, signs of chronic pulmonary edema. Kidneys, pale and granular, hypertensive or nephrotic damage. Liver, fatty changes, possible cirrhosis from decades of poor circulation and medication toxicity. Toxicology: high mercury and opium traces, both common prescriptions of the era. Cause of death: modern verdict. Primary cause: congestive heart failure due to chronic hypertension and cardiac hypertrophy. Secondary factors: long-term mercury exposure, chronic infection, anemia, postpartum damage and psychological stress. Manner of death: natural causes, accelerated by 18th century medicine. Legacy and reflection. Queen Charlotte's body failed her, but not before she produced the next century's ruling dynasty. Her son became George IV, her granddaughter became Queen Victoria, and her bloodline still sits on the throne today. Yet in her final years she was no glittering monarch, just an elderly woman gasping for breath in a damp room at Kew, her children fighting over her will, and her husband still locked away in madness. The autopsy might give us science, but the tragedy gives us humanity. In the end, Queen Charlotte's greatest legacy wasn't her crown. It was her endurance. And now, centuries later, the evidence of her suffering is written not in history books, but in her body itself. Subscribe for more royal autopsies, scandals and secrets.